We can do better than that. There you go. Floyd House Flicks. Just finished watching In the Heat of the Night. Um, yeah, a very intense movie. Uh, I I must say I was taken aback. It's the first time I've ever seen In the Heat of the Night. Um, Rod Steiger, Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier delivered an amazing performance in this, and it was something else. Um, takes place in Sparta, Mississippi, in the mid to late '60s. Sidney Poitier traveling to see his mother, and he was on his way back home to Philadelphia, where he was a homicide detective, one of their best homicide detectives. And he was on his way back. And it just so happens there was a murder in the town, and he was found in the train station waiting for his train. It was immediately wrangled and taken to the police station or the sheriff's station. No questions asked. Just, yep, you coming with me. And being a black man in a situation in the South as a police officer, I know he understood what he was up against, so he didn't say anything. Eventually, when he got to the station, the sheriff asked the deputy, was this man questioned after he found out the character, Mr. Tibbs, was a homicide detective for the Philadelphia Police Department? The deputy said no. Just a matter of fact, nope. And things just started to get uncomfortable at that point for him because they knew they could not disrespect him as much as they wanted to, yet and still the disrespect kept coming. Um, and then what else ensued, or what else would typically ensue in a town in Mississippi in the 60s, was they continued to call this grown man boy. All these bums, trash people would call this man in a fine suit, well spoken, they would call him boy. The movie made me reactive, to say the least. I felt some kind of way. I'll admit it. I felt some kind of way. But it's a movie. But a lot of the stuff that happened in this movie that took place in 1967 still happens to this day. Still happens. Um, Disregard, all sorts of things like that. And I didn't want to get too deep in terms of racial inequity, but it happens. It happens. Um, there was a scene where there's this uh, wealthy individual named Endicott who they feel is involved, potentially involved, in the murder that took place in the town while Mr. Tibbs was there. And he was falsely accused of. Turns out he didn't do it, of course. But Mr. Endicott, the sheriff and Mr. Tibbs went to see Mr. Endicott. And Mr. Tibbs proceeded to ask him questions. Mr. Endicott said, let me get this straight. Are you questioning me because you think I have something to do with this? He says, no. Mr. Tibbs says, no, I'm just, we're just routinely doing this. And Endicott walked up to Tibbs and backhanded him in his face. And without a blink, Mr. Tibbs backhanded him back across his face. Now, as the sheriff was standing there, this was funny to me. One of the funniest parts of the movie to me is Endicott says to the sheriff, now, Sheriff, you saw that. Sheriff said, I did. He said, well, what are you going to do about it? Sheriff says, I don't know. And then the Endicott's lips started to quiver. Meanwhile, there's a butler, a black butler, they were in a greenhouse, and the black butler's in the greenhouse with them with some lemonade or what have you. And the black butler witnessed this, and Tibbs walked out of the greenhouse. The sheriff walked out of the greenhouse. The butler looked at Endicott and just was like, I can't believe he didn't say anything, but he looked at him. He looked at him and just shook his head in disgust. And he walked out of the greenhouse. And then Endicott turned around and walked further in, and his lip started to quiver and he started to cry. Listen, don't go in there with the rah rah if you're not ready for the rah rah. That's how things work. You go and you smack somebody in the face and think you're going to get away with it because you're in a town where that normally would fly. He's not from that town, so you're not going to just do that. Needless to say, once that was over, then the whole investigation with Tibbs started. Mr. Tibbs became more invested in the crime that took place in the town. I'm not going to give any spoilers, although this movie is quite old. But it's my first time seeing it, so I don't want to ruin it. So I'm not. But I was taken on a ride with this movie. And I'll read the synopsis of the film. It says, this undisputed masterpiece from director Norman Jewison is one of the most radical and acclaimed movies of its generation. Rod Steiger gives an Oscar-winning performance as a sheriff from a small town in Mississippi who finds himself in an uneasy alliance with a black homicide detective from Philadelphia, strikingly portrayed by Sidney Poitier. In the course of investigating the crime, the two strong-willed men must reconcile their inherent prejudice toward each other. Not quite each other, but I'll let that go. Inherent prejudice toward each other. The final result is justice and an unlikely but touching mutual respect. Supporting performances by Warren Oates. I mean, there were so many character actors in this movie. So many. If you watch this movie, you'll probably recognize almost all of them. Warren Oates, Lee Grant, and an evocative score by Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones did the score for this movie, and Ray Charles sang the theme, the title track, the title song, which was amazing to me. It was the vivid cinematography by Haskell Wexler all add to the film's authentic aura of a hot summer evening in the Deep South. Winner of 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture for Walter Murch, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Editing by Hal Ashby. In the Heat of the Night is a blistering commentary on race relations and a landmark in entertainment. This is the first time this was on 4K. It looked amazing. It looked great. It sounded great. The special features on this film is an audio commentary by Norman Jewison, Rod Steiger, Lee Grant, and Haskell Wexler. An audio commentary by film historian Steve Mitchell and Nathaniel Thompson, along with Robert Murch. There's a documentary called They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, which I thought was a brilliant scene because Rod Steiger at one point asks Mr. Tibbs, his name is Virgil Tibbs. He says, what's your name? It's like, Virgil. What do they call you when you this and that? Try to read him and talk to him any sort of way. And he said, they call me Mr. Tibbs. Mr. Tibbs. Don't get it fucked up. Oops. But that's what it was. Don't get it twisted. Mr. Tibbs. Mr. Tibbs. So it's a 1970 sequel. It's also included in this set, a Blu-ray full-length movie called They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. It's a sequel to In the Heat of the Night. There's also a full-length movie called The Organization, 1971. It's the finale to Sidney Poitier's character as Mr. Tibbs. Another feature is Turning Up the Heat, movie making in the 60s featurette. The Slap Heard Around the World. You heard me talk about it. And yeah, it's very, yeah, I liked it. Quincy Jones, Breaking New Sound featurette. You know, come on, we're talking about Q. Quincy Jones, forget it. You know, it was all that. So, that's my brief commentary on In the Heat of the Night. It was an enjoyable movie. Um, well made. I don't. I'm glad I finally got to watch it. So I'm gonna pick something else on this Sunday, and this has been an interesting take on blacks in cinema, and we're going to continue this. We're going to do this every week and Sunday, blacks in cinema. I don't know what I'm going to pick yet, but I'm going to pick something. You see, and I will be back. All right, y'all. Floyd House Flicks, you know what it is.